And I also happen to be a Gallup certified strengths coach. So today we're going to talk about communication skills and strengths, so strengths-based communication skills in the workplace. So I would love to hear, since we're kind of a small group, I would love to hear from the students that are in the room a little bit more about maybe tell me your name and why you signed up for this session, like kind of what you're hoping to learn, or if you're participating in one of our internship or professional development programs that we offer in our office. So I'm going to bounce around the room as I see you. So Allison, would you like to start?
Hello, I'm Allison. I'm taking this through my senior capstone class. Yeah.
What's the class?
For like the human development.
Okay.
Senior capstone.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And Aiden?
Hello. Yeah, I'm Aiden, junior, and I am here for CEIP and hoping to learn a little bit more professional development skills for my internship.
Where are you working?
I'm working at it's called SimScale. It's a simulation software company.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, is it Ho-Chin? Did I say that correctly?
I have to find a mute button. It's Hao Chin. I'm also here from I saw the notice on CIP, and I'm working at FedEx Ground right now, my first rotation co-op.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Harrison?
Hello, I'm Harrison. I actually only found out about this like a few days ago while randomly scrolling on Handshake. And it talks about communication, and I think that's something I really need to work on. So I decided to give it a shot. Maybe I can learn a thing or two here.
Great. Okay. Is it Jongwon? Did I say that correctly? Should you let us know?
If I let me change it. Right.
Or you can just tell us.
Right. You can call me David.
David. Okay.
I also found this on Handshake, and I was interested because I took this assessment like a couple years ago, but I totally forgot about it. So just out of curiosity.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Phoebe?
Hi, I'm also taking this for my human development capstone class, and we just talked about using our Clifton strengths. So I thought this would be a cool way to like develop and learn how to use that.
Great. And Madison?
I'm also here through the human development capstone.
Great. Well, that's exciting because I was a human development major many, many, many years ago, generations ago. So, and I had a human development capstone course that I had to take. All right, well, great. I'm glad that everybody's here. You'll also notice some folks from our office, Cody, who already introduced himself, Kayla, who is one of our, is a CEIP coach also for those of you who are in the CEIP program, and is the instructor for our part-time course, so you may know her there. And then Janine and Julia are also part of our team. They work with our co-op and internship programs as well. Okay, so if you haven't already, well, obviously we're going to be talking about Clifton Strengths in conjunction with communication. So if you've taken Clifton Strengths and you haven't pulled up your results, go ahead and do so. Pull them up so you can have those to look at. About halfway through the conversation, we're gonna start talking about Clifton Strengths. So if you want to pull that up, you can take a look at it. And if you're here and you're not familiar with what Clifton Strengths is and you've not taken that assessment, that's fine. You can just go along with us, and there will be opportunities for you to participate and learn more about it as well. Julia, you said me too. What were you? Was that you? What were you saying me too? Sorry, I missed that.
I was also a human development major.
Oh, that's right. Okay, she was. That's right. Okay. They're the best. pull up those Clifton Strengths if you have them. We will get to them, but we're going to spend the first part of this time just talking about communication skills in general, and then we're going to talk about how you can look at communication skills through the lens of your strengths. Okay, so let me, and Kayla or Cody, would you mind putting the link to Clifton Strengths in the chat? The Gallup, I think it's bt.gallup.com. Yeah, in case somebody needs to go to that. Okay. All right. Okay, let me get my presentation going here. Okay, so we're in a skills shop. We're talking about strengths-based communication in the workplace. So I would love for you guys to either throw into the chat box or unmute yourselves and chat with us, and tell us a little bit about what it means to you or what you think when you read a job description that says they are looking for somebody with excellent communication skills. So you will likely see that in almost every job description that you read. It will ask for something about strong communicator, excellent communication skills, something about communication. So when you see that in a job description, what do you think about? Like, what comes to mind? You can unmute yourselves, put it in the chat. Okay, being comfortable with public speaking and presentations. Yes, that is a form for sure. Being engaged in conversations and acting on the conversation. Other thoughts?
Being able to speak professionally and articulate your goals.
Yep. Speak professionally, think it through, like what is the information that you're wanting to share? Yep, absolutely. All right, great. Well, you guys touched on most of the ones that I want to tell you about. Okay, so what I love about communication and also what's challenging about it is that it is one word with many different meanings. So when we talk about looking for somebody with excellent communication skills, there's so many things we could be talking about. You guys already mentioned some of them, but are we talking about verbal communication, like verbal and oral communication? Are we talking about like public speaking and presenting, like somebody said? But then don't forget about written and electronic communication now, which we are doing a lot more of, and particularly in the workplace than we did before COVID. There's a lot more of that going on. There's nonverbal communication. So, you know, eye contact, leaning in and listening, facial expressions, those kinds of things. That's nonverbal communication. And that has also changed a lot over the last 2 years. You know, think about the difference of being in a room with somebody and seeing how they react to conversations, seeing them smile, or maybe kind of like look over at you or you know, lean in and say, yeah, like while you're talking, versus what we're getting in this sort of flat digital world that we're in right now, where sometimes people have their cameras off, so you don't see them react, or you can't really see how somebody is necessarily engaging with you through those nonverbals. Then we have our listening skills as part of communication. So not forgetting about how important listening is as we communicate. We need to hear what's being shared with us so that we can reflect on it and think about it. And then the information delivery that often when we're communicating, we are sharing information with somebody. So I think maybe Phoebe mentioned that, like what it's like making sure you're able to articulate the goals of the conversation. So when somebody asks you to talk about your communication skills in an interview, it's a lot to think about, like, because you've got to kind of think about, well, what do they mean by communication skills, and what are the different ways that I excel in different parts of communication? And it would be totally reasonable to look at this list. For example, I can look at this list and say, you know, I prefer verbal communication and public speaking over written and electronic communication. So I could say, in some ways, I think I'm excelling in some aspects of communication, and I know that I still need to work on other aspects of communication, but it's all one skill set. So how do we talk about that? Okay, so we have looked at some research, and employers are definitely weighing in on communication skills and what they look like in the actual workplace. So it's probably not surprising that communication skills, whether they're written, oral, or any that we talked about, are really kind of your workplace superpower. Communication skills impacts obviously how we communicate and collaborate with people. It impacts our teamwork. It impacts our interpersonal skills. It impacts our leadership. It impacts our workflow, our work productivity, and all that sort of thing. So it impacts our professionalism, as somebody mentioned. So communication impacts all of those different aspects of how we work with and deal with people. So it really is something that you want to be thinking about and working on, and not expect to be great at it. We're all working on communication skills. I've worked for many years, and I know I am every day working on being a better communicator, being a better listener, sharing information in a way that people can hear and understand. So we're all always working on this, and we know it's really important. So 75% of employers look for written communication skills on a resume. So that means they're looking for evidence of good communication skills on a resume. Well, that sort of sounds like a no-brainer, because a resume is a form of written communication. So that's one great way that they can take a look at what your written communication skills look like. But then they might also be looking at ways that you're talking about your written communication skills on a resume. When employers were asked how essential communication was in the workplace, it was rated a 4.5 out of 5.0 through a survey done by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So we took that and we decided to ask our employers, like Virginia Tech employers that hire Virginia Tech students, how important are communication skills? How important is that skill set in their new hires that they hire each year? And our employers rated it as a 4.7 out of 5.0. So it's very high. Communication skills, professionalism, and teamwork were the three that the Virginia Tech employers rated as the highest. So it's going to be an important skill set for us as we develop our career and enter into the workplace. Okay, so let's look at how we define communication skills in career and professional development. If you're involved in one of our programs through our our students that are in our CEIP program, you've heard a lot about our 7 professional competencies for career readiness. And this is one of those 7 professional competencies. So we've defined it and really thought about, how can we help students develop this skill set while they're a student so that they can really demonstrate it when they get into the workplace? And how do we get students to be thinking about it? So we've defined it as the ability to articulate thoughts and express ideas effectively using oral, written, visual, and nonverbal communication skills, as well as listening skills to gain for understanding. The ability to deliver information in person, in writing, and in a digital world. And it includes all those things I talked about earlier, the verbal communication, the public speaking, and that list that we talked about. So that's really, when we're talking about communication through our definition, that's what we're looking at. Okay, so what does that actually look like, particularly in a work setting? Okay, so to be able to speak clearly and use appropriate language when talking with your coworkers, customers, or clients. Adapting your conversation and topics based on the audience and the social cues. So I think that's a little bit what was talking about, making sure that you're communicating your goals effectively, that you have this professional presentation in your communication style. Then we get to the actual presenting. So present effectively in front of a group with confidence and ease, research topics and content to deliver a customized presentation. So I don't want to downplay this as, just, oh yeah, it's so easy, you should be able to present in front of a group. Presenting in front of a group is really terrifying to a lot of people. I remember reading a study one time that said that they researched Americans who said there was more people who were afraid of dying they were afraid of more afraid of public speaking than they were of dying. So that gives you a pretty good indication of how horrifying public speaking is to a lot of people. So that's a skill set that like sometimes people are just like naturally, oh, I'm really not like, I don't really get that nervous in front of people. And then there's people who really are going to get nervous. Then there's people who are fine to get up and talk in front of a group, but they don't really practice what they're going to say. Like they feel at ease doing that, but maybe they haven't really thought about the information that they're going to share. So getting up in front of a group is very challenging for most people. So if you're in that category, you're not alone, and that is something that you can work on and really start to get some practice in, so you feel more comfortable in that situation. Okay, then we also talk about writing in a professional and appropriate style that addresses the purpose of the communication clearly and concisely. Being aware of personal nonverbal messages and how others are responding. So sometimes like that's a little bit like reading the room when you walk into a room and you can kind of get a sense of how people are feeling or at what level of detail you need to share information. Sometimes you might be talking to some people and you realize, oh, they don't really understand what I'm talking about. Maybe I need to back up and give some more context, or maybe you're with a group that you can go into a lot more kind of like professional lingo with or whatever. Also, understanding that you're going to talk to different people in different ways. How you might talk to your friends is different than how you might talk to your boss or a faculty member or an advisor or somebody like that. Okay, so listen actively and give undivided attention without interrupting. Make sure to ask clarifying questions, and then synthesize the delivery of important and relevant information and customize information to the audience. So that's what I was just talking about. You're going to change even what your communication looks like based on who the audience is and what they know or what they don't know. So that's what it might look like in a workplace. Okay, so when we think about workplace communication, you got to kind of get in your mind that this is all about the exchange of information and ideas within an organization. So we're specifically talking about what your communication looks like in the workplace. And I've already emphasized this, but communication is really important in the workplace. So why is it important? Well, it avoids confusion, first of all. When we are communicating information and we're clarifying information, it avoids any confusion or uncertainty about what the expectations are or about what somebody said or what somebody is doing when we're communicating that information. It also provides purpose. So when somebody effectively communicates to you why you're doing something and what it's all about, then you can feel that sense of purpose for what you're doing, and you can buy into it and be driven to be successful at it when you know what the point of it is. And that comes through communicating and articulating what that purpose is. Strong communication builds a positive company culture. And so you'll hear about this, and maybe some of folks that are already in internships or things like that might want to share, as we start talking about this a little bit more, share about their own experiences with communication. When have they seen good communication in an organization? When have they seen bad communication? And how does that impact the organization? I'll tell you, nothing is more frustrating for a team than to feel like there's something going on and nobody's telling them what it is, or they don't feel like their leaders being transparent with them. And so having that like open flow of communication is really important in a company culture. It's also very important in terms of like interpersonal communication and conflict management. So we want to have organizations where we normalize having conversations with folks about things when things are going well and when things are not going very well. And so if we're having those conversations all the time and we're being open about that, then that communication can come more naturally. Communication also creates accountability. So it has to be clear what the expectations are for you in order to be accountable for those things. So a leader is, not in a position to hold their team or their staff accountable if they're not clearly talking about what the expectations are and laying those out for the people on their team. So having that good communication creates accountability for the leader, and it creates accountability for the team members. Okay, so when we think about communication, effective communication occurs when a message is both sent and received accurately. And this is actually very difficult to achieve because there is a lot of room for human error. I was in a meeting this morning where there was a conversation that went on in the meeting, and I thought the conversation was one thing, and then I talked to somebody else who had a completely different version of the conversation, and I just kind of laughed. I was like, were we even in the same room? But it's just through our perspective, we heard things differently and we processed it differently, and that's why it is so easy to have communication breakdowns with people, and particularly within organizations. Like, I'm hearing something from my own perspective, somebody is hearing it from their perspective, and that is going to change just based on who we are as humans and as people. So remember that it is just really difficult to send and receive messages accurately all the time. So think about all the places that communication happens in the workplace. Obviously, it happens between coworkers. You're communicating and sharing information with each other. It's also happening in terms of messaging with our customers and our stakeholders. So what is the communication that we're sending to them about our product, about our service, about what we do? And is that being communicated effectively to the stakeholders that it needs to go to? Communication happens from our leaders, and good communication is considered transparency from the leadership. So when you feel like your leader is being open and honest with you and telling you what's really going on as much as they're able to, that feels like a positive flow of communication. It feels like everybody on the team is being honored in terms of what they need to know. We use communication just to keep others informed. Think about all the messages that get sent through email, through Teams, or different Slack or different chat channels that folks have to share information with each other, as well as meetings and talking, just casual conversations with each other in the hallway or on the phone. So we're communicating a lot in all of those different methods. And then we communicate with our teams when we're working together, when we're collaborating, when we're solving problems, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to stop right here and see if anybody has an example of a time where they felt like a message was either sent or not received correctly, or they've seen really good examples of communication, or maybe some challenging examples of communication in a workplace. Does anybody have an example?
Yeah, I have an example.
Great.
Yeah, so when I first started my internship about a month ago, the first thing I noticed was it was so much harder to communicate with my coworkers because it seemed like everybody was really really and if you wanted to talk to somebody, you had to schedule a meeting on Google Calendar, a few days in advance. So it's a lot harder to have meetings with people, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example, particularly when you come in as an intern and everybody's already got their plate full of all the work they're doing. And then you've got to come in and figure out, how does all this work? How do I meet with people? And they're a lot busier than I am. And so you got to find out kind of what the rules are, the processes are. And then sometimes people they forget that you don't know how to do that. So they're not telling you how to do those things. So yeah, that's a great example. Also thinking about different people's workloads and that sort of thing. Okay. Anybody else?
I have one. So last semester I did the Linking Live Study Abroad program, and we spent a month in Rwanda teaching in the schools, which was super awesome. But a lot of the times we were not kind of given any information at all on what we were supposed to be doing. So before going there, we had full lesson plans written for the entire 4 weeks we were teaching. Got there and realized that all the lesson plans were wrong, and we had to redo them all. And then we had to give a presentation, which we told was going to be to 15 nursing school students. And we got there and it was 150 nursing school students. who they had canceled their classes for and exams so that they could come see us speak. And we didn't have anything prepared other than like a little laptop that we were going to show to the 15 people we had been working with. So that was pretty tough, just not knowing what was going on and not having the ability really to have good communication because of the language barrier.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting example. Yeah, because you literally have a language barrier, which is causing those messages to not get around correctly, on top of just how hard it is to communicate in general. And you guys were in different countries when you first started and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. So you can see all the ways that it can kind of really go wrong. And so when communication happens well, it really is a really great thing. It's a beautiful thing when it happens, when it happens well. And it's something that I'm always working on, thinking about how I'm sharing information. Am I, giving enough detail? Am I giving too much detail? You're just thinking about all of those kinds of things. So I found this quote, which I love because I think it summarizes everything we're talking about that I'm sharing here, is that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So you've probably all had that experience where like, I just told them that, like, why don't they remember that? Or I thought we've already talked about this. Like in your mind, the communication has happened and that person just did not receive the message. They didn't hear you. They were distracted. I mean, think about how distracted we are all the time now with all the different modes of communication that we have. So just because we sent an email doesn't mean that the person read it, or just because we said it doesn't mean they were listening or processing what we said. So what are the different ways that we can like follow up on that? So some strategies for effective communication include asking questions, voicing your opinions, and just like speaking up, honestly. I think that is something that new employees or new professionals are a little wary about. They're not really sure how much they should speak up. Wow, if I ask a lot of questions, is it going to seem like I don't know what I'm doing? Have I been here long enough to share my opinion? And to communicate this information. So my answer to all of that would be, yes, ask questions, because speaking from somebody who's been, working for 20 plus years, I sometimes forget that people don't know the stuff that I know because I've been working for 20 years. Like I forget that they may not know how to schedule that meeting with their supervisor. And so asking questions is a great idea. Also, asking questions brings new perspective into the conversation, and it brings new ideas in. And it kind of takes people out of their they're out of their box and to think about things if somebody's asking questions, because then it's like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. But since you bring that up, either that wasn't communicated well, or wow, that's a really great idea and we need to like keep working on that. Another important aspect of communication is feedback. So like I said, we want to normalize giving feedback, giving positive feedback, giving constructive feedback, so that it all seems really normal. You want to be able to easily tell somebody that they're doing a great job and telling them what they're doing well. And you want it to be just as easy to give them suggestions on and feedback on things that they might do differently or consider doing in a different way. So I think it's a great new professional or young professional skill when you can ask for feedback and really think about what you're going to do with it. So giving that feedback, asking for feedback, and like strategizing and maybe going back to your supervisor and saying, oh, thanks, you told me such and such, and I've really been thinking about that, and now I'm going to work on it in this way or something. But that you're processing that feedback and you're thinking of strategies around it. And feedback can be sometimes wonderful to hear, sometimes it can be difficult to hear. And so you'll also want to see how you sort of react to different kinds of feedback. And maybe when you get some really critical feedback or constructive feedback that you think, oh, I feel kind of like this feels really personal to me right now. Maybe you just need to go and think about it and then come back to your supervisor and have the conversation. But feedback is really important for your supervisor, it's important for you, it's important for everybody in organizations. And then my biggest tip would be to have a conversation with your supervisor or your teammates or your coworkers about your communication style. And so what we're going to do today is you guys are individually going to like start to put a frame around what your communication style is so that you are able to talk about that with somebody. But have that conversation, ask them about their communication style and tell them more about yours. And that's really important because people communicate in different ways, which we're gonna see kind of outlined when we talk about strengths. But like I mentioned, I'm not a very good written communicator. I much prefer to talk to people. But if somebody on my team or somebody in my office is more of a written communicator, like I realize I probably need to sit down and like really hammer out an email or a message or something that I'm going to send to them versus I know who are the ones that I can just go and pop my head in their office and talk with them. I'm pretty sure, I think I did this. I should have. I think we did this in a meeting with my whole team where we just kind of talked about like, what's our communication style? Like, what's our work style? And we just kind of went around our table when we had hired some new folks and just talked about that so we could all hear each other talking about that. But that can help set some expectations and help you meet some expectations around communication with your supervisor, with your coworkers, or with your team. So those would be some suggestions and strategies I have for effective communication in the workplace. So again, we're thinking about that message being both sent and received in the way that you mean for it to go there. So, and there can be things that impact that. There could be generational differences between how people like to communicate or what modes of communication they're most comfortable with. Probably some of your coworkers that are going to be closer to your age are going to probably be comfortable communicating in a lot of the same ways that you do because you've had those same experiences. Like you've been on Slack or you've been on GroupMe or Teams or whatever, and you've done that really easily. Like my daughter's 23, so she just is in her first job right now, and like she doesn't really like to talk on the phone that much. She likes to talk to her friends on the phone, I suppose. But like I remember one time I was like, well, why don't you call them? And she was like, oh my gosh, that would be rude. And I'm like, it's not rude to call somebody. But in her mind and in her world, like phone calls are not something that you do. Like you would text somebody or you would do a written communication first. Versus with some older folks like me, I'm perfectly fine with a phone call or with stopping in my office and talking to me. So sometimes it could be generational. Sometimes we just prefer different styles. Some people like written communication, some people like verbal, some people like that more formal kind of official communication, and some like to be more casual. Some over communicate, they provide a lot of details, they talk a lot. Some under communicate, they don't quite give you enough details. So all of those are things that you consider when you're thinking about how your messages are going to different people. And then there's just our communication styles in general, and then how we can look at our Clifton strengths and the leadership domains of Clifton strengths and how those have some influence over us understanding our communication style a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to move into the Clifton strengths part now. But before I do that, does anybody have any questions or comments about what we've talked about just communication in general? Anything that surprised you, anything that you think is an important part of communication that we haven't discussed yet? Any thoughts around any of that? Okay. And also you can add them in the chat. Okay, there might be some chat stuff here. Let me go and look. Oh, Julia, are you answering some of their stuff? Thank you. Okay. So if you've taken the Clifton strengths, you may or may not be familiar with the leadership domains of Clifton strengths. So if this is the first time you're seeing this, your report is probably likely color coded like this. So hopefully there's some matching between what you see on your results and what I have here. But there's these 4 different leadership domains and strengths. and they are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And I think that these leadership domains are a great way to think about your communication style. And when we break down, I'll break it down to you in a couple of slides. When we break this down and we look at like what are some of the characteristics and behaviors of these different leadership domains, they connect with different types of communication. So it'll give you a way to kind of start thinking about your own communication style. And I think it's really important for you to understand yourself and how you do things before you can really be impactful in helping other people understand what you're saying or help even to understand other people. So knowing yourself is going to help you in those relationships and that communication with other people. So take a minute here if you've not ever seen these leadership domains before, and take note of where your top 5 strengths are. So for example, my top 5 strengths are positivity, communication, woo, empathy, and developer. Okay, so when I look at these leadership domains, I see that I have communication and woo in the influencing domain, and I have developer, empathy, and positivity in the relationship building domain. I'm bringing this up to you for a very specific reason, not just so you know about my strengths, but because it's going to come into play in a minute. But I have 2 strengths in influencing, and I have 3 strengths in relationship building. So keep that in mind. So make a note to yourself, like, where do your strengths fall on this? Maybe you have strengths that are represented in all 4 of these leadership domains. Maybe you have strengths in just a couple, but take note of where your strengths land into these leadership domains. Anybody got a question about the leadership domains, or have a question about where theirs fall or anything like that? Anything before we move on? Okay, because I'm going to describe kind of the characteristics of each of these. Okay, so now that you've noted where yours are, so what does this really mean? What do each of these mean? So if you fall into executing, or have strengths that fall into executing, then we would say that you are outstanding at getting things done. So this domain is all about making action happen. In a work setting, you're likely excellent at turning a vision into tangible, practical steps. You can take the 30,000-foot idea and the street level resources that are needed to pull it off. So I think of executors like as directors, they're taskmasters, like they know how to get stuff done. They make to-do lists, they like to take charge, they like to direct people into doing things. Okay, so that's an executor. Then we have influencers in the influencing domain. And these are people who are outstanding at building momentum, or getting a spark started, or starting a fire. So this domain is all about bringing attention to change. In a work setting, they're likely comfortable with taking charge. They might speak up or give others or a project a voice when it might otherwise be ignored. So they're the people that you want selling an idea both inside and outside of an organization. They have the power to influence and empower and to make change. Okay, then we have the relationship building domain. And so these people are likely awesome at emotional intelligence. This domain is all about people skills. So on the job, they probably build rapport easily with others. They help others feel seen, heard, and appreciated. They might catch the nuances that hold a team together and create a culture of high performance. So relationship builders are often the glue that holds the team together. They're the people in the organization or on the team that are having the check-in conversations with the folks that they work with. They know what's going on with everybody. They're making connections with people within the team or within the organization. Sometimes they're real quiet about it, sometimes they're not, but they're definitely kind of doing this instead of like standing up in front of the group talking, they're kind of doing more behind the scenes connecting, and it's very individual and very personal how they connect. Okay, and then the strategic thinking leadership domain, these folks are great at making decisions. This domain is all about critical thinking on the job. They can absorb and analyze information well. They probably enjoy getting lost in a chosen topic or kind of like nerding out on something, like they get really into something and could just get completely lost in it. They might like researching, predicting, or processing information and do it differently than other members of their team. They're the let's work smarter, not harder group. Like, let's really think about a new way to approach this. They're a little bit more out of the box thinkers. They're more creative, a little more futuristic if you look at their strengths. So they're really pushing the team into a new direction a lot of the time. But they're doing a lot of this in their head. Like this domain is really internal, a lot of internal thinking, a lot of internal processing. And so they're, again, maybe not as much in front of the group as some of the other domains are, but they are a very powerful force in the group because they are moving the group or the team because of their well thought out ideas. Okay. So as you read that, start to be thinking about if you were going to claim one of these areas as your communication style. I want you to start thinking about that. I'm going to give you one more example. So this is important to think about because you remember I mentioned that I have 2 strengths in influencing and I have 3 in relationship building. But when I think about my communication style, I would fall into influencing. I connect with influencing with my communication style. Even though I have 3 strengths in relationship building, when I think about my communication, it's definitely influencing. So as you're thinking about this, it doesn't necessarily mean which is the domain that I have the most strengths in. It's which is the area that really seems to address how I communicate with people. Okay. So another way to break it down for you here is I'm looking at some of the characteristics. Okay. So how do these different domains communicate? So an executing person is going to be very results focused. So let's get started on this. Let's take action on this. They are goal oriented. They tell it like it is. They make decisions quickly. They often are on the go, moving around, doing things quickly. They speak crisply, maybe concisely, directly, and they like to take risks. So something to watch about this style is that sometimes they may seem insensitive because they're kind of like just pushing and going through and kind of telling people what to do sometimes, which could also seem intimidating. And that maybe sometimes they make abrupt decisions, like they just want it to be decided on. So they're just going to like, here's the information, I'm going to make the decision right now. Okay. Then we have influencing, which is ideas focused. And so this is, okay, consider my ideas. I want you to think about my ideas or consider my ideas with this. So they are people oriented, they're animated, they're easily excited. They make expressive gestures, they're entertaining, they like to think out loud, they speak rapidly. And I know you guys can't see me in person, but like my hands are always all over the place when I talk. Like I'm everywhere. I'm very animated, which is like my communication style, which is why I picked this. But something to watch would be that I could be a little imprecise. I might have a lot of ideas and not as much follow through as I need for those ideas because they're kind of coming at me all the time. Okay, then we have the relationship building characteristics. So they are people focused. So their thought might be, let's discuss this with the team. I want to get the team's feedback on this. So they're relationship oriented, they're sensitive to others, they're dedicated, loyal, they're fun and they're warm and they're friendly. They avoid conflict. They put an emphasis on the team. They are just like the best team members. They just want everybody to be successful and work together. So something to watch with this type is that sometimes they have a hard time saying no. They may make decisions more slowly, and they may be a little bit more apprehensive about change. And then we have the strategic thinking. So this is the process focus. And they're like, let me think a little bit more about this. So they're task oriented, they make lists, they speak very deliberately. They believe there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. They're very efficient. They're very precise. So something to watch with these folks is that they may not be as big of risk takers as some of the others because they're very deliberative in what they do. And sometimes they're with their very linear focus, they may miss some of the big picture. So it's good for them to work with somebody that can see a little bit more of that. Okay, so now that I have given all of those descriptions, can everybody pick with a communication style that they think they connect with the most? Anybody struggling? Okay, I would love it if you guys threw it in the chat and told me which one of these you're connecting with the most right now. Okay, great. We've got relationship building, strategic thinking, relationship building, influencing, strategic thinking, and relationship building. Okay, I don't know if I missed one, but yes. Okay, great. Okay, so you've identified your communication style. Now we're going to talk a little bit about understanding our strengths and our communication style. So what I was going to move us into breakout rooms, but I'm not going to since there's not as many as we thought there would be. So instead, I just kind of want us all to kind of talk about some of these as a larger group. So I'm actually going to stop sharing for right now, and I am going to post these questions in the chat in case you want to go back and look at them. But I will just ask you guys. Okay, so for those of you who picked, did anybody pick executing? I don't think anybody did. Did anybody pick executing? Does anybody on the call at all, like Janine or Kayla, does anybody connect with executing? No, I didn't think so.
I have a lot of executing strengths, but when I'm thinking about it in terms of my communication style, I was leaning toward influencing more, but it's hard to pick one. Yeah,
I think that's, yeah, when you think about the domains, they resonate with you in different ways. Your work style might be a little bit different than your communication style, which might be a little bit different than your actual leadership style. So where your work style, you might see a lot of executing, like how you communicate would be maybe more influencing. Okay, so who picked influencing? I think there was at least one person. Oh, that was Kayla. Okay, so me and Kayla are both influencing. So what are
and Phoebe? I think Phoebe might have raised her hand.
Oh, and Phoebe did also.
Yeah,
okay,
I did.
Okay, great. So what are some of the strengths that we each have that are in the influencing area? So I already told you mine. Mine are communication and woo. So what about?
Yeah, my top ones were activator and woo and influencing.
Okay.
Woo, for sure.
Woo. Okay. And I know Janine is a wooer also. Okay. So, so those are some of the strengths that we have in common from that area. And then activator was one that Phoebe had that was different. Okay. What about our relationship builders? What were some of the strengths that you guys had?
I feel like I'm just always the type of person to like make sure everyone's okay with the decisions being made and like making sure just that everyone's on the same page and everything.
Mm-hmm.
My top strength is empathy, which I feel like is really accurate when I am working with others.
And so Allison and Madison are both two of our human development people, right? I know Phoebe, you are too, right? But yeah, so I can see how that relationship building is definitely consistent with some of the interests that you might have in human development also. Yeah, that the empathy, that wanting to make sure that everybody's okay with what's happening, that we're all on board and happy together and that sort of thing. Okay, and then strategic thinkers. Who were our strategic thinkers?
I was one of them. Yeah.
What were some of your strengths?
I say that I'd like to be like very methodical when solving problems. I like it when there's not much ambiguity. Otherwise, I just sit there guessing. It's like, do you mean it this way or that way? Yeah.
Okay. How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I agree with Harrison. I'm the same way about problems, and yeah, again, I'll relate this back to my internship because that's all I'm thinking about now. But yeah, I need to have a very clear view of like a problem before I start it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay, great. So when you think about your communication style, do you think you tend to communicate best oral, written, in person? Like, what do you think that looks like for you, and maybe why? And is there a strength that plays into that?
You know, I didn't do the Clifton strengths, so I can't speak much on that. But I will say, I think I'm much better when I have time to type out or write something to a coworker.
Mm-hmm.
That way I can really be specific and, you know, not be too wordy and
Mm-hmm.
get the question answered.
Mm-hmm. And that models exactly with what that strategic thinking domain. And if you think about how you want to communicate, like that matches it like spot on. Like I would say that the executors and the influencing are going to likely be more into verbal communication, and the strategic thinking is going to be more into written communication. And then the relationship building could probably go both ways, because I know a lot of people in relationship building that are really interpersonal and they really like to talk a lot. And then I know some that are really a little bit more soft, like not shy, but they prefer like kind of quiet one-on-one conversations with people. And they do like to do a lot of writing. We have a relationship builder in our office who gives the most beautiful cards to people like all the time. And she just likes to think, like express herself through these cards, and she writes out these cards to folks. And so we can't assume relationship builders always also are like they're really like verbal communicators, because sometimes they're very interpersonal and like to do some of that through writing. But so think about that, like really start to cue in on how do I like to communicate with people so that I could talk with a supervisor about this or a boss, and what is it from my strengths that maybe can make me do that, really kind of aid in me doing that really well or very successfully. So Aiden, in your example, when you do get to do Clifton Strengths, which you will do as one of your assignments for coming up for the internship course, it'll be really interesting for you to see what some of those strengths are, and if you fall into that strategic, what of your strengths fall into that strategic thinking domain, because you can really then say, oh, okay, yes, I can see this strength and how it can help me in my communication. So I have communication as one of my strengths, but I also have woo, and I have positivity, which is actually a relationship building strength. But those all play into my communication style. Like I tend to try to be pretty upbeat. I tend to try to see the bright side of a situation. And again, really try to connect with people and meet somebody and figure out something we have in common really quickly in order to communicate with them more effectively, which is my woo. Okay, so when you think about, so I know we just have a couple more minutes left. When you think about your strengths and your communication style, how do you think that those help you work with people who have different styles than you? And what would you want somebody to know? Like, what would you want your supervisor to know about your communication style? Like, if you were to think about having that conversation with a supervisor on a first day of work, what do you want them to know about your communication style based on what you've heard now today and about your strengths? And I will actually share my screen again, and I'll go backwards. so that you guys can see some of this written out again. But what are some things you would like a supervisor to know about, or somebody else on your team to know about your style, your communication style, and how would you share that?
Like on harmony, something that I really that I felt with, that I related to. I definitely want like the whole group or like a team to be on the same page before moving forward on a decision. And just personally me, I would be like, I would want like my supervisor to know that I'm more of a like, this might be appealing in some situations and less appealing in others, but like I'm more of a support kind of player. Like I want to bring out other people's like potential, like kind of push each other to make a whole decision altogether.
So harmony is one of your strengths. What are do you consider yourself in the relationship building communication style?
Yes.
What are some of your other strengths that are in that?
A developer.
Sounded like it.
Yeah. And connectedness.
Yep, I can see that. Yeah, but when you were taught, yeah, some of the things you were saying, I was like, I wonder if he has developer. It sounds like that. Yeah. So yeah, those, yeah. So you have, so when you go in and you read your strengths report, it will give you so much information about all of this. But it's, yeah, it's something to think about, like, okay, so what does that harmony mean for David, and how does that play out in his communication style? How does that play out in his team? Like, how do you feel when there's conflict going on? Like, that's probably very uncomfortable for you because you want high levels of harmony. So what is your communication going to look like in those kinds of experiences? So thinking about some of that. How about somebody else? What would you want to tell your supervisor about your communication style?
I have futuristic, which is strategic thinking, as one of my strengths, but I definitely think I'm more influencing when it comes to communication. So I really like in-person communication because I really like to bounce ideas off of other people and like see if there are new ways of doing things that seem monotonous and boring, or like changing the ways that we do things just to make it easier or anything like that. So bouncing ideas off people in person is most helpful for me because I can see what their ideas are and it's not like back and forth on email or over text.
Great example. Yeah, that is all going to be such good information for you in interviews, even when they ask, like, what's the type of work environment that you like? Like, give me an example of when you communicate with people effectively. You're going to be able to kind of go back and think about and reflect on this and your strengths as you think about your style. So even though futuristic is a strategic thinking strength, it does play into how you communicate. And so you're already making that connection there and showcasing your strengths in other areas as well as part of that style. So, okay, great. Well, we talked about a lot of stuff today. And if you have other questions about communication or about strengths, I'm happy to talk with you about that. You can also come and meet with me if you want to hear more information or get a debrief, a little bit more of a detailed debrief on your strengths. But does anybody have a question? I would love, if you have questions and you're talking about them, I would love for folks to throw in the chat just something you learned about yourself today. Is there something that you learned about yourself you want to share in the chat? And Phoebe, did you have a question or a thought? Okay. So, and if you want to share, if you want to unmute and share it, I'd be happy to hear it out loud also. But I just love to hear something you learned about yourself and your communication today.
I just kind of wanted to say that I'm still lost in thought right now about my communication style because I have a sort of split in both relationship building and strategic thinking. And I find that I use both of that, both of the features when I talk to people, and I can't really pin down like, all right, am I more influenced by, I mean, right now it feels like I'm more influenced by strategic thinking because I'm still lost in thought and I'm still trying to figure out before I want to say anything, I'm still trying to figure out, all right, am I over here or over here? But when I go and talk to people, a lot more of my energy is leaning more towards figuring out what the other person wants or what their perspective is. So it's sort of like a mixture, and I'm a little confused, but I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it sounds like a mixture, and I think that probably what those have in common for you is the thinking and the process. I think even though relationship builders, like I said, even though we tend to think of them as really people oriented, which they are, they're also they're very thoughtful, and a strategic thinker is very thoughtful also. So I could see in both those situations, like you might prefer written communication. You want to be very thorough and kind and thoughtful in your communication, which would be characteristics of both of those domains. So you might really be somebody that you can't choose, but you know that about yourself. So when you go to have a conversation about your communication style, oh, I think I'm a mix of these two things. And that right there is just great knowledge for you to have about yourself. All right, great.
Thank you. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. Go write that down. Use it at your next interview. Okay, so Phoebe learned that you have strengths in each of the 4 domains and how all those play into your communication style. That Aiden wants to work a little bit more on his verbal communication. Yeah, because your written communication probably comes more naturally to you. So you can see that might be a natural strength for you, and you can capitalize certainly on your written communication. So just because it's a strength of yours, and you should work on that because you're going to be really great at written communication, and you're probably going to document and have really great documentation. But then you can also be thinking about, but I also do want to work on this verbal style a little bit more, or be aware of it when I'm working with somebody who has a really strong verbal communication style. Great. Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Well, it was very great. It was so great to talk to all of you today and hear a little bit more about your strengths and talk with you about strengths and communication. And hopefully you have just gotten some great answers to some interview questions for the future. And we'll have good conversations with your supervisor when you start off at work. But we are here to continue this conversation or answer any questions that you have about communication, strengths, any of your professional development while you're here at Virginia Tech. We're happy to talk with you. But I'll hang out for a minute. If somebody has an individual question, I'm happy to chat with you. But if not, thanks for coming.